Alan Clements Uncensored. Thank you for listening to my podcast. A few notes about the presentation. After years of scripted talks, many of them methodically outlined, some even memorized, at least in part, I decided to drop that style and simply speak spontaneously from my heart. So that's what I do. My talks are raw and improvisational. I make them up as I go along. In addition to my World Dharma talks, I also offer at times readings from my books, Instinct for Freedom, A Future to Believe in, The Voice of Hope, and Wisdom for the World. I also offer readings of my personal notes, sometimes guided meditations, dialogues from my World Dharma public forums, interviews from radio and television, and sections from my show, Spiritually Incorrect Meets Relationship Incorrect, The Great Reckoning, and the occasional conversation with someone I find interesting. I also want to express my deep gratitude to the people who have made donations to me, either a one-time or recurring donation, either on the support page of my website, alanclements.com, or pledged a monthly amount as little as $1, perhaps $3 or even $5 a month, through my Patreon site. If you're inspired to do so, you can support this podcast and my work by making a monthly pledge at Patreon. That's patreon.com, patreon.com/Alan Clements, and there you'll find my page. You can use a credit card or pay through PayPal, and your monthly pledge, that's what it takes, just a few minutes to set up, allows me not only to do my work, it allows me to create my art, use my voice, speak my Dharma, free of commercial consideration or advertisers. Thank you from my heart for taking the time to listen to my podcast, and thank you for your generous support. I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Deborah. Bless you. Just an item of business. I have written a number of books, and I'm very fond of giving them away for free. And my latest book, which is called A Future to Believe in, if you'd like a copy of it, a PDF copy, all you have to do is put your email on here, and I will never use it again after the book. And you can trust that. And please carry on if you would like that, and just be happy to send it. You can also distribute it to anyone you want. It's been 7 years, and I'm very proud of that book. I have a new book coming out tomorrow, actually, called Wisdom for the World, Requisites of Reconciliation. Some of you who've read a little bit about me, and maybe Deborah has mentioned to you, I'll give a brief talk, a little bit about my background, and then my desire is to hang out with you. I'm very fond of most people. I would like to say all people, but not true. I'm very allergic to some people. Not proud to say that, but it's a little bit of a quirk of mine, probably from excessive meditation. Got very refined and became very arrogant in that process. It's one of the shortcomings of meditation, if you haven't noticed, for some people. You get very particular. You go to a restaurant, you want the food the way you want it. But this book that's coming out tomorrow is called Requisites for Reconciliation, and it's with my former teacher in Burma. And I dare say, I forget your name?
Maria.
The lady to your right?
Maria.
We were talking about a woman in Burma, Aung San Suu Kyi. Many of you know of her. She's been universally vilified in the international media wrongly. I have done a book with her. I spent 6 months with her at her home after her first year of house arrest. And by way of saying, this book is a conversation, a set of conversations with her spiritual teacher. Very few people knew Nelson Mandela's spiritual teacher or Martin Luther King's spiritual teacher. When you think of Gandhi, you don't think of having him a teacher. She had a spiritual teacher. In these 9 nights of conversations, he outlined what was very new for me after nearly 37 years in and out of Burma, where I was living as a Buddhist monk in the early
1980s, the late 1970s. I'll talk a little bit about that. Then I became actively involved in their struggle for freedom. You may remember in 1989, the famous Chinese man standing down a tank in Tiananmen Square. A year before that, in Rangoon, Burma, millions of people took to the streets demanding peacefully, we want freedom, we want democracy, mostly led by young people, boys and girls in their 16, 17, 18, 19. How many people I spoke to, they knelt down in front of soldiers. You are our brothers, you are our sisters. Women were in the ranks of the military as well. All we want is freedom, freedom of choice. We want to use our liberty to commune together. Pause. It's impossible to fathom unless you've been in a war zone. Maybe others in this country here have been in that terrible circumstance. But having studied totalitarian dictatorships for the better part of 40 years, having lived under dictatorship, having been in war zones, it is no easy task to communicate the complexity of oppressive, primarily men, who want to dominate viciously the minds and souls and the bodies of men, and particularly women. Rape has been used repeatedly, as you know, as a weapon of war. In this woman's country of Serbia and Croatia, where I was a war correspondent temporarily for nearly a year, after my monastic years, it was a horrific circumstance where one sees the oppression of ideology. Pause. I am really suspect today of believers. In her country, believers, super good-looking people, blue-eyed, blonde hair, brunette, Mercedes-Benz, PhDs with psychology, with philosophy, existentialists, super hip, super rich. Look around. People like all of us here were conscripted in ideologies against your best judgment. Within 3 short fucking weeks, they were conscripted in fucking genocide. For 43 months, good-looking people, smart people, PhD people, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, yoga teachers, meditation teachers, got swept up in truth. You can underscore that truth with all you want. Pranayama truth, Jungian therapy truth, Hatha yoga truth, veganism truth, democracy truth, ISIS truth. It was a 3-way genocide for 43 months. And it was televised to the world, and no one fucking did a thing. No one did a thing. The point being is, as I've immersed myself in the spiritual world, and I think all of you have, fair enough? We're all there. We're adults. We're hip to the world. It's complex today. It's messy. There's no easy answer. It's not about just being positive. To feel the dimensions of human existence today takes a heart bigger than mine. I am constantly on the altar of anguish. As I've grown spiritually and opened psychologically, my heart is repeatedly broken in a good, painful way. It's not an easy thing to emote around people. How do you feel today? It's not easy to communicate how I feel today. With climate change and climate disruption, with many scientists talking about the possibility, the distinct likelihood of already being over the cliff in the 6th great extinction. And yet here we are, talking about individual peace. So I'm really hip to the notion of what, number one, indoctrination. How easy it is to be conscripted into belief systems that defy your own best interests and those whom you love the most, thinking that you're actually doing things on the right side of truth. Burma is a case study. Now, let me just take the last half of this evening before I really open it up so that we can talk, which is the easiest and the most beautiful thing for me to do. I want to meet people. I'm in Bali to meet good people. Deborah and I mentioned, we spent 4 hours, a good human being. Only just met this woman. She's opened up her home in her friends, in the people that help support her in her life, so that I could meet you. And I'm begging you, please meet me, talk with me, let me learn from you. I have nothing to teach you. I'm not here to do that. I do a thing, my primary livelihood is books, but advances for the kind of books that I do are almost zero because of the vilification of Aung San Suu Kyi. Random House ditched their deal with me. A 4-volume set of 200 interviews with Burma's leading political prisoners. 7 years in the making, risking lives to be in these people's company with one question, Rob. What is your yoga in prison? What is your Dharma when you're locked away? Where do you find refuge when all is taken from you, your wife, your husband, your children, your job, and they want to take your mind? And they would look at me and say, you know, they can do all that they can to strip me of the privileges of society, but unless I give them my mind, I own my sovereignty. Point 2. People ask about meditation, about the wealth of mindfulness, which is ubiquitous today with Forbes 500. To me, 2 things here before we get into the questions and conversation. I beg of you, how well do you own your mind? How well do you own your thoughts? Do you get out of bed in the day and really go, wow, I have a day to evolve my precious human thought? How many spiritual teachers talk about you're not your thought? Fuck you, man. I am my thought. I want to own my thought. I want to evolve my thought. My best friend died of early onset Alzheimer's. He was a DJ. He was a professor of English at Kyoto University. I introduced him to his wife. He was a Buddhist monk with me. He died at fucking 60 years old. I'll tell you, every thought that he had was so sacred as he lost his mind, so to speak. You are your thoughts. People think of meditation, I'm not my thought, I'm not my mind, I'm not my body, I am that. The evolution of thought, owning your thought, are your thoughts grounded in the principles of freedom? How well do you live in the liberty of global human rights being the vocation of who we are? We have our jobs, we have our homes, we have our things that we do, but in a country where universal human rights are taken from you, just like economic human rights and environmental rights, the vocation of those who caretake freedom of thought, freedom of speech. You and I are going to really disagree probably throughout our life, but that our love together is that we communicate with honesty and respect and non-blame and non-malice. But that you think and I think, that to me is the highest order. But ideologies, especially spiritual ones, want you to believe thoughts that are very spiritually correct to the ism. Believe me, I was a spiritually correct Buddhist. There's a way that you can do it right, and there's a way in which you're a heretic. You got to be very careful of the thin line between the two. Let me jump into some monastic stories here. You know, unlike you maybe, I got involved in meditation because of one big secret. I didn't know myself very well. And meditation was a head-on collision with everything that I hoped to avoid. Mostly my restlessness, my doubt. I could not be happy without sex, without money, without masturbation, without a newspaper, without comfort, without a book, without a bed, without the sheet, without that, without this, avoiding this and without that. And for some reason, at the end of the day, when I was 25 years old, I had a beautiful girlfriend. We're still best friends after 50 fucking years. I read everything. I went to college on a scholarship to study law. I said, fuck this. What am I going to be a lawyer for? A lie in America? I wanted to be a US president. Would you have voted for me more than Trump? Yes. Look at the miserable wretch that we've got in the White House today. I went to a school with 6 US presidents as graduates. It was a real thing. but it felt like an indoctrination in a line. I feared that I would grow up in Washington, D.C. with 2 cars, a fantastic family, well paid, maybe even as an ambassador or a senator or a congressman, and living a bullshit lie. I didn't have the courage to own my own mind. I felt that meditation was what I needed to do. I went to Burma. It was the Oxford of mindfulness meditation. I studied with Mahasi Sayadaw, one of the great leading mindfulness meditation masters in the world. The first day in the monastery, 20 hours of meditation. The second day, 20 hours of meditation. The third day, jump time, the first 2 years, 20 hours a day. Don't do that to your children. Don't ever think you need to aspire to do that. Do it in moderation. I got so seriously involved in the high art of slowing down. People talk about stillness. You want to be still? Go fucking meditate 20 hours a day. You'll see how crazy your mind is. The more you do, the more amplification it becomes. It is a wild, crazy monkey. Being in the now works if you've got one big now in the day. But as a Buddhist meditator, there are 10,000 nows in a minute. And they are real sticklers for when you eat a mouthful of food, try it sometime. Lower your arm and just chew. If you want to learn meditation, what does it mean? I know you all practice it. Slow down, experience that which you do in the moment as if it's the highest, most sacred event of your life. And they tell you to do that over and over and over. No talking, no eye contact, 4 hours of sleep. I'm not trying to be proud here with credentials, just telling you how neurotic I am. 20 hours, 8 hours of sitting meditation, 6 hours of walking, 1 hour in between, 2 meals a day, no food after 11 in the morning. You talk about being hungry, by 3 in the afternoon, only water. 5 o'clock in the morning when you eventually have breakfast, if you eat too much, you're down, and they come to your room and get you out and get you back on that cushion. And so slowing down in the monastery after about the first year, for the second year, you are sitting so still and in these heightened states of consciousness that the whole world falls away. And it's one of the best kept secrets in the world, how happy you can be without having to talk to other people. I mean, it's really difficult to integrate back in. And you have these remarkable relationships. People often ask, what do you remember about those years in the monastery? Singular events. I had a teacher who I absolutely fell in love with. He was my best friend, my father, my brother, my saint, my redeemer. He was the first person in my life who greeted my intensity with his own intensity of questioning. You ever meet your twin flame on a spiritual level where you feel that you have met someone that just rocks your boat? And you go like, holy Hannah, I have met the person of my dreams. They want to commune with me endlessly. For the first night, we talked until 4 in the morning. No clocks in the monastery, no watches. No one's keeping track of appropriateness. You get to tantrically hang out without the artifice of a calendar. So cool. You can't touch money, much less own it. So all these various things give you this incredible sense of peace and well-being with these deep, sacred moments of intimacy with other people. 2 years went by. I was cruising with 20 hours a day of mindfulness, just watching my mind, watch my thoughts come and go, and watching my feelings. Alan, watching Alan, be mindful of Alan's mind, watching Alan's mind come and go, watching thoughts come and go, doing my yoga. I was doing yoga at that time as well, asanas here, doing this and that, watching my body move, watching each mouthful of food as I tasted it and swallowed it and lowering my arm. We went down to 10 mouthfuls of food a day, mindfully, taking an hour to eat that. If you want to meditate, simply slow down. Start with eating meditation, just eating slowly, looking at your food, choosing your food. Speaking meditation, Many people don't know that mindfulness, one of the best places to study meditation, is with speech. How few people really use speech in a sacred, communing, artistic, poetic way? I'm not saying be eloquent, but how many people are radically committed to truth telling? Choosing their words like they would touching your partner's body with words. Are you using the words that you really want to use? Are you choosing words and using them at the right time? You can say perfectly well-chosen words and telling someone else something at the wrong time, and no matter how well the words are chosen, it's not going to be effective. Space. In monastic circles, those who meditate using language, they play in the physics of shared space. Tone, timing, space, motivation, and non-attachment to outcome. So in a monastery, people ask about meditation. We're in my tradition. They call it all states of mind at all times, in all postures, in all contexts. There's no priority given to the asana of sitting meditation or of eyes closed meditation. From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, your teachers are encouraging you. Which breath did you wake up on? Which breath did you go to sleep on? When you opened the door to your cottage, tell me what it felt like to open the door. When you were eating food at lunch today, talk to me about the last 2 mouthfuls that you ate. The same could be said when you're with your best friend, your teacher. How well do you show up? People often ask, what is meditation? This gentleman does it really, really well. How well do you show up in respect to the energetics of shared space? Not just talking at, talking with, holding higher value expressions that elevate beyond your thoughts or her thoughts? How well do you go beyond existing knowledge bases? And the last thing many people ask about meditation is it's the art of direct experience. And meditation is often seen as, no one would doubt that we require oxygen to breathe. It requires you breathing, and only you can do it, right? Fair enough, very simple. And if the oxygen were compromised, we would not be satisfied with that. We would go out to where the oxygen was pure. And it has to be done on a regular basis. It can't be stored up. The same thing with meditation. It has to be practiced here and now. As oxygen fills the lungs, mindfulness is the oxygen of waking consciousness. It knows what you feel. It knows what you think. It's an awareness of who you are rather than just a fusion with the thought. So it gives you a sense of clarity on, I don't want to say that. Right there on the spot, you can interrupt the habit. How many of you, as we come to the close of this, have heard the word Dharma? Most. The Sanskrit word Dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A, and then the Buddhist Pali word, which is the tradition where I come from, Dhamma, D-H-A-M-M-A. It's really good as the basis of what those two words mean. They're the most heavily defined in the Sanskrit Pali Buddhist dictionaries. You can see 100 pages of definition for the word. In a nutshell, how do human beings suffer? By not recognizing their own primordial fear, greed, and anger. They themselves suffer first when those states of mind arise. It's likened to picking up fecal matter when you're angry. You stink first, fair enough? When you're aware and mindful of knowing the ill effect of a destructive state of mind on your own inner habitat first, you become radically self-responsible in what we know as inconscience, different than consciousness. You recoil from, oh, I don't want to pollute this shared inner-outer environment. I want to be self-responsible. The word Dharma means someone who's self-responsible for interrupting the flow of justifiable blame, anger, doubt, and delusion. Are you with me? Fair enough. So a meditator is uber hip to studying the energetics of those different states of consciousness. How well do you know the energy of anger in all of its gradations? How well do you know the energy of greed? How well do you know the energy of fear? How well do you know the energy of delusion? And the opposite. The opposite of delusion is wisdom. The opposite of greed is generosity. The opposite of fear and anger is loving kindness. And so the word Dharma in meditation is the experiential practice of overcoming, on the one hand, greed, anger, and delusion, and the elevation of love, compassion, wisdom, and generosity on the other. So when people talk about meditation as stillness, it's horseshit. It's not that at all. It's much more intelligent than that. It's the individual dedicated to the evolution of intelligence, not just personal happiness, certainly not just personal peace, because as you probably very well know, the more aware individuals become of their own interior environment, the more disruptive it becomes. Google got it wrong. Facebook gets it wrong. Mindfulness practiced well makes you want to quit your job programming for a lie. It's a disruptive inner technology. It reclaims your authenticity, your autonomy, your ownership of your own mind. Coming to the end. 2 years into this retreat, a man was sitting in front of me, crying at lunch one day. At the end, we weren't asked to talk, and I said, I broke the promise. I said, sir, why are you crying? He said, your teacher told me you're from America. You're only 29 years old, and you've come here. You've been here for nearly 2 years. You've come so far. I am now nearly 80. I am the village head. I've donated the food today for all the nuns and monks and the lay people in the monastery. It's my first chance, free of my responsibilities, to come to this meditation center to meditate for 2 months. And you, as a young man, have chosen to come 10,000 miles, and you're here for 2 years. I'm in awe of you, he said. I felt so somewhat awed about the whole projection and a little bit taken aback. And I went back to my room, re-energized to be more vigilant with the practice rather than taking it for granted. Well, cutting right to the chase. Within a few days, radical stomach pains. I'd been in Asia a long time. It wasn't something new. I had an extreme case of amoebic dysentery, no problem. Take the antibiotics, you're back okay, fair enough. Then all of a sudden, whatever happened, I got typhoid. On top of it, a week later, hepatitis. Then they found a cyst that had to be surgically removed quickly, went into hospital. Botched operation. They wanted to cut my leg off. It was seriously infected. Quadruple antibiotics with hepatitis and typhoid. Intravenous on a bed. 6 months later, lost 50 pounds. Point being, where you take life for granted, whether it be war, famine, any kind of hardship, or in this case, illness, one never knows what's going to interrupt the flow of comfort, security, and all of a sudden, where you're at the top of your game, you are fucking nobody. Ask people who lived in war zones, totalitarian governments. Life under Trump today, we're all in terror of what's happening. It could very well be after I left Bosnia during the war in Croatia, I came back to Canada and I talked to people. Imagine in Washington State and Seattle, all of a sudden the people there, the American Christians wanted to commit war and imprison the Canadian Buddhists. Welcome to dictatorship. My point here is that my teacher voluntarily brought in people to help support me when I couldn't help myself. Meditation isn't just about me. Eventually, the next aspect of it, it's just like Deborah introduced me to all of you, it's a caring for other equal to yourself. It's called, in South Africa, Ubuntu. U-B-U-N-T-U. I cannot be who I am without you. Showing up for yourself is okay. radically challenging, as we all know. Showing up for other as intimate, really complex. To own who you are versus how you project and blame and justify, that fine edge of self-responsibility, a beautiful thing. In this room of mine, when I couldn't take care of my own natural functioning, as a 30-year-old, being taken to the toilet was fucking humiliating. It was so, so hard. Being showered by strangers. My lips were so dry, having my mouth moistured with a little cool washcloth. Again, my point being, look around. We look like kind of autonomous friends and somewhat, I know you, but I know you. Imagine, and it happens all over the world, imagine in Burma, where I was there, groups of 5 or more were a crime against the state. The price, loss of home. Deborah risked tonight losing her home and her business to have you come out here if this was a dictatorship. In Burma, they did it with passion. They said, fuck you, dictator. They owned their voice. Their freedom for you was equal to my freedom for me. They coined a term, my freedom would never be complete without your freedom too. That's pretty cool. When people talk about meditation, it's not just sitting in stillness or peace. If you're in the world and you're relating to a lot of people, obviously you're not hearing anything new from me. Do you dedicate your presence to the development and the transformation, the evolutional beautifulment, the beautification of other together in this moment now? That meditation is so hard-earned and so sacred. The last point, I got out of that practice. I eventually healed, obviously. I was zipping through the monastery like I was walking on water. I was so happy being healthy again. I heard from behind me, Agasara, which was my monk's name, Agasara. And I turned around slightly annoyed. You ever done that? Intercepted from the priority of my life, which wasn't to stop and talk. I stopped and looked with a very well-concealed impatience and had that kind of namaste look to my fucking fraudulent face that smiled and said, what the fuck do you want, by saying, what might it be? All bullshit. But I'm very good at faking how I really feel. I don't know about you, but I'm proud to say it. I am proud to say that I'm doing all that I can to interrupt the mask of my pretense. And I looked at him dead in the eye, and he paused for a long ass time. It's like, okay, I can make eye contact, but come out with it. What the fuck do you want? Now, I'm exaggerating. You know exactly my point. Maybe you do these kind of things too. You are the priority, and Ubuntu is second place. He looked at me straight through my heart and said, Mamidala, do you remember me? I said, Mammi Babu, I do not remember you, sir. He said, in English, he said, I was one of the people that took care of you when you were dying. And immediately he reminded me of what I've forgotten. How many of us have had lessons like that? We're going to leave tonight, quickly. We'll be relating again shortly. What will we take with us into our lives? We'll take the predominant stories and narratives, the emotions, and the people with us. If I could beg of you to take something with you, give over to the people closest to you in a way that you've never given before. Time is so radically short. I lost 9 of my principal intimates the last 2 years. I lost the country of my spiritual life in Burma. I lost a book deal. I lost a film deal. I lost a relationship. I'm not moaning and groaning. I've been through that type of terror. But it really brought me back up again. Just as I looked at that fellow and said, what is it that you want? I took care of you when you're dying. Can we say that to each other? I want to take care of you while you're living. That meditation. Don't hold yourself hostage to the next workshop, the next therapy session, the next retreat, the next healthcare moment, the next on the mat asana, the next teacher training. There may not ever be a time. Be the chemistry that you seek. Be the freedom that you aspire to develop in breath. Oxygen is something that we breathe in here and now. How well do you live in the reverential sacred of shared space? 3 years into my monastic life, next door, an older man was given a room next to mine. Turned out he was the general of the army, U Tin U. Metaphorically, the dictator's son. He had just been released from 6 years of imprisonment. He hadn't talked to many people. He told me his story, that he was imprisoned one day playing golf with the dictator in Burma, Ne Win, the very man who imprisoned Aung San Suu Kyi. And they came on the 9th hole and they put me in jail and threw away the key. No books, no mattress. Only me in there as the general of the army without my uniform, my family, my children, my army, my country, my people. Nothing. I shook the walls and the bars like an orangutan, he said. I was desperate to escape, and I couldn't escape. And one of the guards gave me a book on meditation by Mahasi Sayadaw, and I learned to mindfully watch my mind. And after my release, I came to the monastery. But do you know, Alan, you live in the sanctity of this monastery, but do you realize that you live in a terror state where there are no human rights? All the meals that are provided for you are done by the hard-earned life of these people who toil difficulty and live under the world of oppression where disappearances are rampant. I had no idea of context larger than the intimacy of the monastery. Self, and other than self, and then greater context. Those 3 dimensions of meditation. Well, he went on to co-found with Aung San Suu Kyi and U Chi Mung, the National League for Democracy, the nonviolent political party that began to challenge the dictatorship that incarcerated him. He went from radical, natural-born killer to Gandhian, peace-loving, nonviolent leader of his country. If redemption isn't possible, what's the worth of our yoga? When you look at the eyes of people in your Ubuntu, Alan, I'm talking to me, how easy it is to judge the look of someone else not being acceptable to the look that we want. The economic status of someone, how we don't even question the indoctrination of our cultural, economic, our sexual, emotional needs. We're embedded in these structures. I beg of us to mindfully be leaders and interrupt these deeper recesses of how we're being conscripted in spiritual totalitarian doctrines. How easy it is to walk in lockstep to a prescribed asana called an ism, whether it be Jungianism, whether it be Theravada Buddhism, whether it be Vipassanaism, whether it be Pranayamaism. The orthodoxies of these schools are alive and well. Be careful. Do you really own your own mind? He went to prison 19 more years. I asked him in the book that we did together, The Voice of Hope, which if you want a copy, I'll be happy to send you one. Brilliant book of these people's lives. The last story. I said, sir, you spent 19 years in solitary. When it really gets dark in the prison cell, how do you get through? What's your yoga? What's your meditation? And he looked at me and laughed. He said, Alan, remember we were monks together? This was like 1996, and this was back in 79 that I first met him. I said, I do. He said, remember that time you had amoebic dysentery, you were walking on the village path and you were moaning and groaning like a good American and you were saying you were going to die? We got back and got you antibiotics and you were really happy and you walked on the water like Jesus? Well, in a prison, you ask how we get through the darkest time. There are no medicines. And I immediately went, wow, that's really hard to fathom. People choosing to go to jail for their beliefs. I'm not saying that that's us, but what is your conviction? What are your principles? Where are your values? And he's saying to me, there are no medicines. There's no toilet, there's no mattress, there's no mosquito net, there's no pillow. There's no wife, there's no children, there's no visitors. You're alone in there. Even your being in the moment now, in some ways, is somewhat useless, because where do you go other than in the moment? After a while, you see how obvious it is. Here I am, and does it bring peace? To a large extent. But believe me, he went on for an hour like this. When the going gets tough in solitary, it's not easy. The food was so wretched, it wasn't even good for the dogs. Then my jailer snuck in some verses of Jesus. As a Buddhist, I knew nothing about Christianity. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. I read this over and over again. How many of us have justifiably felt angered at rejection? They know not what they do. How easy it is to live as a spiritual victim. Buddhists are all really good spiritual victims in a way. If you're not really careful, it'll define who you are. And he's saying, I was judging my oppressors. I'm the leader of the country. And I still am not embodying in-breath, out-breath. I'm proud to be here because my freedom would never be complete without their freedom. And I would give food to the prison guards. And it relieved me of some of my angst, he said. It eroded a little bit more of my victimhood. Are you with me? At the end of the day, he said, what really got me through, and he took my hand, and the Burmese are very affectionate, very, very physical. He squeezed it. And I have this on film too, by the way. He squeezed it, he closed his eyes. He said, Alan, when the going really got tough and solitary, I thought back at moments of love in my life. Love, the love issue. And I would imagine my son, my colleagues, Aung San Suu Kyi, and my wife. And I'm paraphrasing to some extent in this last 2 minutes. I would bring my wife into panoramic focus inside of my heart and mind. You know, how many times we talk about being present? Nelson Mandela, if you read his book, A Long Walk to Freedom, he's quoted as saying, for 25 years, I thought of the day that I would be free. What does that mean about being in the now? Very different interpretation. It's called simultaneous awareness. Aware of being present, at the same time, it's incomplete without your freedom and my freedom. And so U Tinu was saying, I brought my wife into panoramic inner focus. I would see her face. I would see her eyes. Imagine 19 long-ass years in silence. And you're talking about love, Alan. And I would smell her perfume. I would hear her words. He's closing his eyes like he's reliving it. I was fearful I was re-traumatizing him. But he was going on into this poetic. And I would breathe into this moment, and I would bring the memory of my wife into my heart. And I would feel it with every cell of my being. And I would bring that memory of the past into the present and let the warmth of that memory fill my mind and body. He opened his eyes as if they were 12 years old, and he said, what got me through was bringing the memory of love into the feeling of the present. And it was warmth, human warmth, that got me through, the quality of love. What I got from that story, I don't know about you. We talk about meditation, personal peace, personal happiness, Ubuntu, showing up for people. The quality of our yoga together. I know we're busy, but fuck busy. Just call off busy. Take the watch off your arm. It's okay that you're on time. You'll always be on time. Showing up to the ones you love. I'm not saying make strangers your ultimate intimate objects of reverence, but there's about 5 or 6 people in my life that are really my inner tribe, and there's another 10 that qualify for really deeply reverential relationships. Those 15 people get the best of me. And beyond that, show up with all of your heart. And I'll close with this. She will know. We were in the country together during that war. Good people, PhD people, yogic people, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, teachers, sexy, cool people, measured people, skillful, philosophy-based people, turned into saints and animals together. And what got them through, I'll tell you, the year that I spent there was a rule where I went out to nightclubs at night when it was safer and more compelling, and amazing people. And there was a rule of thumb. Dictatorship wants to erase the beautiful uniqueness of your own gorgeous features and make you into the same faceless nothingness of their own totalitarian, homogenized insanity. Refuse to participate in the criminality of psychological totalitarianism. Own your fucking entirety. Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose? Take off your clothes. Who taught you to judge the size or the shape of your breasts? It's a cultural indoctrination. It has no belief in reality other than the empowerment of your own indoctrination. Bring sacred awareness to it. Live in freedom. Who taught you to dislike fucking cellulite? Who taught you to judge the inability to work in society and make it on the terms of a lie? Mindfulness, spirituality, yoga fucking disrupts your life. Get it? You do not want to blend in, as Krishnamurti said. It is no measure of success to adapt to a profoundly sick society. You are thought leaders, as I am. You are radicals. You're living in another country. Live your radical expression of a Dharma that is grounded in basic global human rights. Use your mind. Use your hands. Celebrate your thoughts. Communicate and celebrate communion. Express yourself. Give back. And above all, look around. You could imagine one day, 2025, maybe 2022, maybe 2020, that I have to look at this lady and I have to remember her eyes. I have to remember her face. I have to bring to attention inside of my mind, because I'm locked away in solitary, because I dared to speak and to confront the apparatus of totalitarianism on a political, social, cultural, and on a spiritual front. And somehow, a really great yoga teacher became a dictator. They had it in Bosnia. A leading psychiatrist committed crimes against humanity. He was the coach of the yoga soccer team. It happens to good people. What I'm saying here is, we may not ever meet again. But let us remember that we met in solidarity to global human rights. We met in respect and freedom. We met in a yoga that isn't asana-based. It's how you live in liberty. Fair enough? In a monastery, we had many people that were maimed, blind, broken, could not walk. And you see that, oh my Lord, perfect sitting postures are anathema to dignity. It's all about the quality of how well we show up. And so I beg of you, look around. How well do you make contact with the people in our lives? And that'll be the measure of what we take into our tomorrow, as you know, take into our, hopefully, our futures, and hopefully we communicate the evidence of that conscience to our children's children, to the butterflies, to the birds, to the animals, to the regeneration of this beautiful, strange planet that we're on, so that economic rights, human rights, and precious environmental rights, not rights, we have an obligation. We have an obligation, as it's been said, to think 7 generations from now. How will our behavior affect life on the planet? Not just our own immediacy, but how well do we project our behaviors into the future of life when we're long, 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 long forgotten? Who will be the freedom fighters at that time? Remembering stories in Canggu, in Seminyak, in Ubud, in Sanur. Wherever you go, we are the people doing all that we can to fight the good fight. So from my heart to yours, thank you for listening to me. I appreciate you letting me speak my mind. If I've crossed the line anywhere at all in what I've said, it's known to happen. Brash American trying to make the best of my life. Please forgive me, it's unintentional. And if there are things that you would like to discuss or questions or comments, I'm all ears.
That has been Alan Clements Uncensored. Thank you for listening. You can find the entire list of my podcasts at alanclements.com, along with my books and upcoming events and live broadcasts. In addition, you can also book a private session with me if you wish by phone or Skype on the website. If you're a regular listener or simply feel moved to support my work, you can make a one-time donation or a recurring donation, a tax-deductible one, in any amount you feel comfortable, either on the support page of alanclements.com or a monthly pledge through my Patreon site at patreon.com/AlanClements. Thank you for listening to my podcast, and thank you for sharing word of it among your friends and on social media. Thank you from my heart. Until the next time, blaze on with fearless love.